So hello everyone and welcome to the first webinar organized by Finlandia Foundation National. The emphasis is really on the word first as we are learning this, and many of you were already listening to our early scramblings of this, but we will get going. I will start going first some of the technical details. In your computer screens, you will see the pictures of us panelists. Choose a gallery view from the top right corner of your screen. Then you will see the panelists on the right-hand side. Our presentation should be prominent on the screen. You can maximize the presentation picture by stretching it all the way to the right with a cursor. And then our panelist pictures are minimized. Only the panelists will be heard and seen during the webinar. However, we hope you'd use the Q&A function to submit questions throughout the presentation. Please do not use chat function to submit questions as our resources are quite limited. So that's all about the tech, and we hope that everything will go through smoothly. And needless to say, I am very, very pleased to see so many participants joining this. It is imperative that we Finns join forces and collaborate to get information and programs to Finns, Finnish Americans, and Friends of Finland. Finlandia Foundation National is the leading independent organization fostering Finnish culture and Finland in the US. Today, Finlandia Foundation National is pleased to cooperate with the Embassy of Finland in the United States on this two-part webinar series about topics related to education in Finland. This is a widely discussed topic worldwide, and we have all been convinced that Finnish education system is one of the best, if not the best in the world. Today's session will cover the Finnish education system in general. It is to cover what makes the education system in Finland unique and recognized as one of the leading and most successful in the world. Next week, we will have the second session in this series and cover studying in Finland. That session will cover more practical aspects, such as application process, requirements, and financial aspects, and where to find information. Please remember to register separately to that session later this week. We are improving the processes, and the registering should be a little bit more streamlined this time. Also, a recorded version of this webinar will be available at a later date. And also, if you want to receive this presentation on paper or by PDF, please send our office an email to request it. Our email address is office@finlandiafoundation.org. And as I mentioned in the beginning, the questions from the audience can be submitted through Q&A function and will be answered at the end of each segment of the presentation or at the end. If not answered, it does not mean that we overlooked it, but instead we will be covering it next week. So my name is Anne-Marie Pastor, and I am the president of Finlandia Foundation National and the moderator of this webinar. I live in Lexington, Massachusetts, but I am a native of Finland. I have gone through the Finnish school system from the very beginning to the end with 30+ students in a classroom every year. Never thought it was so special until my own children went through the public school program here in the United States. Now I would like to introduce today's presenter. Mr. Ilkka Turunen, Senior Specialist covering higher education and science policy at the Embassy of Finland in Washington, D.C., will be sharing his expertise with us. He has extensive experience in education, research, and innovation policy at all levels of decision-making. Prior to his current position, Ilkka held the position of Secretary General in the Research and Innovation Council and was part of the advisory staff to the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Education and Culture and in the service of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, posted in Brussels and Paris. That was quite a tongue twister. Well, anyways, welcome, Ilkka. And before we get going, I just want to welcome everybody who has joined since the beginning. Hopefully there's more than 70 of you right now. And Ilkka, now the floor is yours. I will try to follow your flow, but as I am in the driver's seat with these slides, please let me know when to go forward and move forward. Just say next slide or something, but that will help me a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure. Next slide, please. Actually, I want to start with history. My background. I used to be a historian in University of Helsinki. I will discuss of history proper and the understanding how Finns understand our recent history and the place of education in our history. The belief in power of education and knowledge was an important element in the building of Finnish nation. We used to say that education was very important. Education, teachers and people, professionals working in the field education were important in nation building process. In Finland, education has been seen as an important instrument of social ascent and personal development. This thinking was reinforced by the excellent result of Finnish young people in international competence comparisons, such as PISA study by OECD. Finnish students excelled in mathematics, science, and reading. And that led to a wide-ranging debate about the Finnish model, as was said in the introduction. Good education has become an important part of the Finland's positive country image and Finnish citizens' self-understanding. It can almost be said that Finnishness includes the appreciation of equal and high-level education. This was evident in a large-scale study carried out in 2012 to find out what the Finnish people think about the past. In it, Finns of different ages and from different areas of the country was asked to put various events in Finnish history in order of importance. Finns thought that the most important event in recent history has been the establishment of equal comprehensive school in the 70s. That is free for everyone. The comprehensive school received more mention than political and economic accomplishments, wars, or great man or great woman. 4 out of 5 Finns considered the creation of equal primary school to be either the very important, most important, or important event. And I think this is my understanding when I compare the history of different countries, that such an appreciation of education is exceptional in an international comparison. Next slide. All right, it's there. Going back. Okay. The megatrend is the next. Okay. This figure describes something which is important and in our thinking, that explains why Finns think that education is so important. And the key words in that is that the development of Finnish education system and Finnish economy started relatively late. Actually, the development of our education system started only in the 1950s, and it accelerated in 1960s and 70s. Finland was in that sense latecomer or compared to some other countries and compared to the Scandinavian countries. And you coming back to that. Sorry. Mm-hmm. Because if you look, what happened in Finland really is that it was the development of Finland was very disruptive. The Finnish economy developed perhaps the most, that was fastest development in the 1950s to the beginning of 1980s. And the GDP per person more than doubled from 1949 to 1979. And at the same time, we established a very dense network of higher education institutions. The baby boomers went first in the 50s to grammar schools, and then in the 60s to universities, and higher education system expanded. And that explains that the Finnish people, their own experience, they had the impression that fits very well to real history, that if you invest education, you will get economic growth and you will get prosperity. And that explains why the Finns think that education is so important. Now we can move on to our model of success. This picture is from the Ministry of Education and Culture Future Review. Once during each electoral period, the Finnish government submits to Parliament a report on the future, focusing on long-term perspectives. At the same time, the ministries from their own areas, they draw up the future reviews, their plans of government. And this is a pyramid that we have developed, I think, since the 1990s. At the beginning, this was the way to describe the national innovation system. But at the end, we entered in the model that tried to capture all important elements for a successful country. The development education has been guided by broad-based concept for looking after the human resources. We didn't use the concept human resources in 50s and 60s, but that is something that guides the development of our system nowadays. And Finland has successfully combined excellent learning outcomes with quality and efficiency. There has been a wealth of research on the positive effects of the human capital, i.e. health, nutrition, especially education, on productivity, income, and economic growth. The idea that investing in human capital creates a virtuous circle in which better off, healthier, and more skilled people from generation to the next work more productively and master more advanced technology. In Finland, the whole chain of competence has worked well. This includes there must be effective economic and social institution, there must be good healthcare, sound basic education and higher education, learning to work, apprenticeship, whatever the model is, good vocational education, and public investments and private investments to R&D, with strong linkages between universities and industry, as well as the capacity to innovate all aspects of the industries and the economy and society. And when we last time drafted the future report, we put much emphasis on the change of the working life, disruptive ongoing change, robotization, automatization. And one of the key conclusions in that discussion with the researchers and experts in the field of education and research was that in the future, meaningful life would be ever more important. Meaningful for persons themselves, meaningful society. And that will be ever more important for the prosperous society. And in all the Scandinavian countries, Nordic countries, trust is very important. Trust is something which bears us through difficult ages, such as we are now living during the coronavirus. And the other important element in our discussion was that Finland wants to be open internationally and globally. And I remember that this has been a change in the mindset of Finnish developers, that we have tried to understand that if we have an excellent education system or good education system, it is our responsibility to cooperate with other countries and contribute to solving the global challenges that what we are facing now, climate change, etc. And also it's very important for a small country that we are open, because Finland has been and still is one of the countries that has benefited most of the globalization of the economy and international cooperation. Therefore, internationalization is something that is transversal in our model. Next slide, please. There are a lot of studies of Finnish model of Finnish education, and I think that this is kind of summary what the researchers in different parts of the world consider as the important elements. I already mentioned the faith and trust of importance education. I explained the history, how we combine different elements, economic growth, welfare, and education together. And this is very important in all Nordic countries, that it's universal and free, and with social services such as free school meals. The equal opportunity to all pupils, whatever their place of residence, gender, family, and background or financial standing, is very, very keen to us. And study grant and student loan for those over 17 is very important in the system. And I will come back to that later, but this is also important that such systems should be flexible. There are no dead ends in the system. Next slide, next please. And that is something what makes Finland a bit different, because in our evaluation system is different from many other countries, because we try to focus on learning, not steering. The evaluation of the learning outcomes of schools and students is encouraging and supportive by nature. And we collect information that helps both schools and students to develop. We don't have national testing of learning outcomes, school ranking list, or inspectorate system. And there is very strong role of municipalities and schools. They have a lot of independence, a lot of room of maneuver, implement the guidelines and use the evidence whenever is needed. Research-based education is very important point of departure in our system. And of course, the key element it is in Finland, and I think that it should be everywhere, is that competent teachers with master degrees have a lot of autonomy in their work. And as I mentioned, the Finnish people place a great value of that model and education. Next. This is kind of summary of the most important characteristics of a Finnish education system. I already mentioned that there is a lot of social support, such as school meals. We emphasize the collaboration, it's ever more important. The idea is that the schools should provide equal opportunities and equality, and every student should go. It's possible to go publicly funded school close to them where they live. And instead of a standardized test, there is a supportive development and the joy of learning. And that is why if I would add some new elements to that, I would emphasize joy of learning and evidence-based policy. Those are very important in our system. Next slide, please.
Before we go forward, Maria, are there any questions in the Q&A?
Yes, actually, we have a question from Elaine. In previous slide, please clarify what is meant by, quote, no deed ends, unquote.
What?
Oh, no dead end.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, no dead ends. I can't, looks like I can't read.
Yeah, okay. but I will go because I have a separate picture on that. I come that to later because that is very relevant, very important question. I will explain that a little more later.
Okay. So now you have told us about the background and the basis and possible reasons for the success of Finland's model, but what are really the main indicators that Finnish education system is the best?
This is, I tried to collect one of the most recent evaluation of education systems covering both basic education, university education, and also other elements that are related to human capital and innovation system. And it's very difficult to say what is the best country in the education. There is no such definitive answer to that question. But if you look at those different rankings, you can see that we can identify kind of primary league or the elite or the top 10 or top 4. Singapore is definitely there. Finland belongs to them. Switzerland belongs to them. And if you look at more closely, I would say that the strength of Finnish system is, besides the emphasis of human capital, the basic education, the pre-university education, whatever the ranking list is, it's always that it's a basic education. Of course, there are other good countries there. It's not only Finland. There are the big cities in mainland China, Iceland, Sweden, Switzerland, Norway. Finland is not the only one. But in general, if you look at the results or the different rankings, Finland excels in basic education. But that's important to note also that Finnish higher education system is now among the best in the world. If you take in the account the resources what we invest in higher education and the level of the Finnish economy counted on the basis of the GDP per capita, Finland actually is the best country in the U25 ranking, which is provided by the Economist Intelligence Unit. So that the Finnish education system is strong in basic education. There are better countries in university sector, such as United States. The human capital is the strength, and there are certain dimensions inside the human capital where we could say that Finland definitely is one of the best countries in the world. Next slide, please. This is something that people very often ask how you measure the productivity of the system. And OECD has done a lot of analysis on the basis of PISA studies and other studies and education at glance, which is perhaps the best known indicator publication in the field of education. And I would say that if you look at the time that the students spend in school and how much they have homework, Finnish system is very productive. This figure of the picture describes the total amount of learning hours related to the score points in science per hour of in the PISA study. And Finnish system is productive. Next slide, please. And the other thing which is important for us is that there is a consistent quality. There is very really little variation between schools. All the schools are top schools in Finland. It doesn't matter where you live, you can put your child to the closest school and the quality of school is as good as in the metropolitan area, or where we used to think that the best schools are there, but even in the sparsely populated area, northern and eastern Finland, the schools are as good as in the metropolitan area. But of course in Finland, if you look closely that figure, the picture, you can see that there is a variation inside the school. Actually, it's quite a lot in Finland and also in other Nordic countries. And that partly reflects the idea that we take into account the individual learners, because the people learn differently at different ages. But the challenge is that in Finland, in some other countries, we should decrease also the variation inside the school. But in Finland, the big variation depends on that the girls are the best readers, they are best in maths and science, one of the best in maths and sciences, and the difference between boys and girls is big in Finland. And that partly explains the variation inside the school. Next slide, please. I've been asked very often, what is the student-teacher ratio and class size? And Anne-Marie already referred that during her time, the classes were very big, and we were discussing that earlier. And I mentioned that when I was at the school, the class size was 40 learners at the same class. But now it's much smaller in Finland. The average size of the class is below the OECD average. But there are many ways to measure that, because it depends on the subject area, how big is the study group. But in Finland, the general student-teacher ratio is below the OECD average. And also when you look at some subject areas, such as we think that in language instruction it's important to have small group in order to have a conversation and personalized learning. And also in that sense, Finnish class size is small. Next, please. And this is kind of a summary of what I have said earlier. As I mentioned, the instruction time is low. There are little differences between schools. Girls outperform boys. That tend to be the situation almost everywhere nowadays. But in Finland, the difference is that the girls are so good that the boys are really struggling. And they are very moderate cost related to performance and results. And the economic effect is moderate, although I must say that this is increasing, and this is our challenge. We also see the impact of the social background increasing in Finland. And that is something, because this is a real challenge for us Finns, because we consider the equity and equality so important. And teachers feel highly valued. Next.
Maria, do you have any other questions? I see some cues popping up on the slides.
Yes, first, just a technical aspect. I don't know if you realize the screen is showing two pictures. It might look really small for those not on a larger screen. So if you could make the screen to be just the full screen.
Okay, let me see. Better?
No, now it shows the PowerPoint. There we go. And then we have these might be coming later on from Greg. We have a question about the master's degree required for teaching in Finland.
Yeah, we will be talking about teachers in a bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So then now In US, people often talk about funding schools. They want more and more money. Does that really make the difference? Are additional dollars the answer?
Okay, money is necessary, but not sufficient. We should be honest that if you don't invest education, I mean that the whole change of education, starting by early childhood education and basic education and higher education, that is important. But if you look at the variation between countries, you will soon notice, if you once again compare the performance, the scores in different type of international comparisons, you will notice that money is definitely not the only thing. The rich countries such as Luxembourg and Switzerland tend to spend very huge amount of money per student at the age of from 6 to 17 years. This is in this figure that there are thousands of United States dollars, and this is this is related to the level of the economy. So this is a PP correction. But if you look at the, for example, compare the Luxembourg and Switzerland to Finland, you see that the scores are higher in Finland, but Finland spends only half of the amount of the Switzerland and Luxembourg to education. So there is a big difference. And this is quite a small picture, but I can tell, for example, that Germany and Poland, when they really started to develop the system in 20 years ago, it was not only investment, but was investment for those who were lacking behind. When they raised the level of competence and learning and skills of those who were lacking behind, they received much better results on average in different comparisons, and they spent the money wisely. It's always money spent wisely. I remember when we started that time with the discussion 20 years ago, when the first PISA results were published, the countries were they dealt in two categories. There were countries that were spending education, and there were countries that were investing education. So it makes a difference, but we should be honest that without investment, you cannot have a high quality education. Next, please.
Okay. Maria, did you get any other questions on this?
There's this might come a little later as well, but I understand. So Analia is asking, I understand the curriculum in basic education has changed in recent years. What has changed? Why was there a change? What are the current trends?
Excellent questions, because those are.
Can I answer now? Okay. This curriculum has changed, but I think that when the national core curriculum was adopted 2014, and the basic education, and a year or two later in upper secondary education. And the idea was that we should adapt the education system to the future needs of labor market and also the personal development. And one thing that was very widely discussed, and I want to mention here, that I think that which is once again very important element in our system, that the idea of transversal competencies were introduced in Finland, and that was the new element in national core curriculum. And we have in that national core curriculum for basic education 7 transversal competencies that are based on key values of the society and the needs of your future needs of labor market. And all the 7 competencies are interconnected. And so they are not separate subjects as maths and science and English or whatever. They are transversal, meaning that in all the subject areas, there are type of competencies as understanding and skills that we should develop. And they stress very much of the critical thinking, problem solving, creativity. but we think that are very important for everyone, not only those who continue to higher education and universities and will be researchers. And those 7 are: first is the thinking and learning to learn. Learning to learn is very important in future, because whatever the degree is, it's not enough in future. There are everywhere the countries, the experts are considering what will be the model of the lifelong learning or the continuous learning. The other thing is that we stress the cultural competence, interaction, and expression. The third element is taking care of oneself and managing daily life. This is something which is important that students and learners are able to do that. And fourth element is multiliteracy. And if you see the discussion in United States at the moment, there must be element that the critical thinking, everybody, they should be able to interpret that this is not only the digital literacy. This is multiliteracy, covering that we should be able to interpret different type of information. And this is future nowadays and future also very important. And we stress very much a digital competence that relates to the idea. It's not only the technology, it is something that should involve the pedagogical element. And therefore, the digital literacy is something that is transversal. It's not only natural sciences or ICT as such. It's something that you'll be able to use the technology in all subject areas. Of course, we stress the 6th element is working life competence and entrepreneurship. And the 7th transversal skill is participation, involvement, and building a sustainable future. This is something what was part of my pyramid, because this is important that we really need to contribute. Next. I think that this is something which is new. It's not a total picture, but this is new in our system.
Yeah. So what does the education system itself look like? What are our alternatives and education opportunities after we start the elementary school at the age of 7? I think this has changed quite a lot since you and I went to school.
Yeah, we didn't go to comprehensive school. We have the kansakoulu, folk school. And that's the difference. But I already told that this is something that Finns think that this is a major reform in our system. But I think that what is characteristic that you see the paths from different so this is not streaming and tracking. This is not the idea that there should be stream or track to those who want to go to the working lives, and this is more academic. This is something that in Finland, this is characteristic that the vocational education and training is actually very popular. 42 to 45% every year go to the vocational education training, because this also opens them the road to higher education institutions. But they might want more practical training, but this is something that it's not a dead end. This is my answer to the question why I said that there is no dead end. You have always possibilities to change. You can change from the grammar school to vocational school or vice versa. And the education system gives each student a great flexibility. And actually now in our system, there is for every student personal study plan. Even in the early childhood education, there is a personal study plan for them that is where we can take in the account the level of their development, the phase, how, and whatever the circumstances are and their background. And the binding decisions are not expected to be made at early stage. The road all the way to tertiary education is untracked, with none of the paths leading to that end. So I think that this is important in our system. This doesn't describe adult education, which is also very important in Finland. I already mentioned, and in my figures where I was comparing the different type of rankings. There was also one ranking which was about adult education. The participation rate of adult education is very, very high in Finland. More than 50% of the Finns in labor market and working life have some kind of lifelong learning and adult education every year. And that is perhaps the highest number in the world. Next slide, please. This is something which is for politicians, I think, very important, that in our system, we emphasize that there should be more professionals, not only teachers, all the experts working in the field education, principal, rectors, and nurses, whatever the experts are. They should support the personnel working in the field of education, teachers, administration, but less bureaucracy. And it's very important, it's a long-term strategy and vision, not ad hoc ideas and coming from politicians and other experts. And that has been a kind of explanation in Finland that the education policy doesn't change that much. We always have a coalition government. It doesn't matter very much what parties are in the coalition government, because we have a quite a very broad consensus that education is important and we have to develop it together. And it's decentralized system, decentralized decision making and quality and work assessment at the local level. The municipalities who provide the basic education are really responsible of developing the system, and there is no standardization, inspection and national testing. And as I mentioned earlier, it's very much based on trust and responsibility, and it's based on self-evaluation. Evaluation as such is a statutory task of every educational institution, but it's self-evaluation, it's supportive evaluation, and not test-based accountability. And it's based on collaboration, networking, and participation. There are the teachers, the parents, students, unions, labor market organizations. Whenever we want to introduce a new reform, we start to work together, and it explains why it sometimes demands a lot of time, because it's a discussion what is needed. And there's not that much of competition. There is actually competition. Finnish higher education system is entrance to higher education is competitive. And ecosystem type of thinking and bottom-up approach is always important. Next, please. And this kind of summarizes what I said earlier. The central level, which in my thinking is the Ministry of Education Culture, Ministry of Trade and Industry, the Prime Minister's office, but especially the National Agency of Education. They define educational priorities and define also by legislation the minimum time allocation to subject areas. And they together with the researchers prepare the national core curriculum, which is once in a 10 year we reform that, and also the size of state subsidies. And the local decision is they implement, they put in the practice the national core curriculum, and they on the basis of the targets and objectives that are defined in the national core curriculum, they adapt it to the local circumstances. There is a lot of room of maneuver at the local level. And they also allocate the subsidized. The subsidized are based, for example, on the vocational education, and higher education. The performance of the institution in basic education is more based on the local situation and whether there is more immigrants or more poor people, or then there is more money in those, but it's up to the local autonomy authorities to allocate the resources and also decide the class size and the recruitment policies. I know that some countries, this is a ministry who recruit principals, and in some countries even teachers, but in our case, it's always the local authorities. And the teacher evaluation is the local level, and also the quality assurance. Next, please. I already mentioned the idea of partnership, and there is a lot of players in the field, the national authorities, local authorities, but in our case, it's also important to stress the importance of teacher unions. Teacher unions and also student unions are very strong. My personal experience to describe the role of student union is to say that whenever there is a discussion that should we introduce a tuition fee, whatever the party is, students' unions are always against it. And they say something, and politicians tend to take into account that these are our voters and future party members, and then we have to take into account their opinion. Pupils and students, they are important. Parents are not that important when I compare, for example, Finland and United States. And that is some kind of, I don't know if it's the weakness of our system, but I can explain that, and my explanation is that we trust teachers. We think that because they are so good, we don't need to take care of that things. But if, for example, in the times of crisis like this, there needs to be a contribution from families, and we should, in my mind, we should a bit strengthen the role of parents in this cooperation. And research institutions are very important, especially during the COVID. The first thing the government did was they contacted the best researchers in Finland and asked, they made them 3 questions. And what kind of a future prospects there are, what will happen if we need to shut the schools, and how does it affect equity? It's always that we look at the researchers and research institutions and universities and all the other relevant stakeholders. Next, please.
Maria? I see some questions coming in.
Yeah, I think there's a couple questions that are somewhat in line with this. There's one where you mentioned teacher evaluation. How are teachers evaluated? And then another one, are the school systems in other Scandinavian countries similar? There's a couple others, but maybe.
But the Scandinavian countries, we have I think that there are a lot of differences. That was something that I studied a couple of months ago, because there was some event of the Nordic model. But there actually are a lot of differences. The main similarity is that all the Scandinavian countries invest quite a lot to the education, little more than OECD average. The investment is great in all the Scandinavian countries. The other thing that in all the Scandinavian countries, we stress, or the Nordic countries, we stress the equity. Equity is important in all the Nordic countries, and also the investment. But if you look at, for example, the class size is quite small in all Scandinavian countries. And all the Scandinavian countries, there is importance of the local level. So the basic model in that sense is that there are national co-curriculum, there is something the political level, guidance at the national level, but the importance of local level is the same in all the Scandinavian countries. But for example, the number of lesson hours is almost double in Denmark compared to Finland. So there are differences between the Nordic countries, but there are similarities in terms of the objectives or the basic ideas in the education system. What was the second question?
And about teacher evaluation, how are teachers evaluated?
Actually, it's something that teachers very much do themselves. We, for example, have a teacher education network that they themselves create criteria for evaluation, and is something that the teacher education community do themselves. The other part is that the local authorities give feedback to the schools at the local level, but there is not systematic evaluation for example, based on the grades of the student or scores in international performance evaluation. So this is not directly linked, for example, the budgeting or the salary. The salary, it doesn't affect directly the salary. This is also based on the idea that it must be supportive. But there is an element of a national evaluation also, because we have a national agency responsible of evaluation the education system, and there are separate targeted studies that are that, for example, can evaluate what the teachers have achieved in different areas and the different subject areas. But it's indirect, it's not direct evaluation.
Did you want to answer any more, or moving on?
Let's move on and pick up at the very end the remaining questions. So we have a few more slides to go, and I think that we should move on to the most important factor in our education system, which is the human aspect. And let's talk a little bit about our teachers.
Yeah, I think that there was a question related to that at all levels, whether that's true. All levels of teachers are highly qualified and committed. And the teacher education programs, there is a competition that universities can select one of the best, among the best students at the upper secondary level. If my memory serves me well, the ratio is 1 out of 12 or 11 applicants can enter in the teacher education program. So the teacher education is very highly, and the profession is very highly evaluated, and they require master degrees, and also, which is important, includes the teaching practice. That is, the practice is done at the school level, and it's a real practice. And I think that in Finland, the teachers themselves also think that they are developer of the profession, that they are developed and researchers. That is very important, that all the way to teacher education, the practice and the use of the best, newest research is used. And that is also very important. I have stressed all the way in my presentation the evidence-based of the research. This is so very important. And as I mentioned, it's very popular, and universities can select the motivated. And to be honest, they are not necessarily the best if you look at the grades, a matriculation examination, or upper secondary study leave records, because even more important is that they are motivated. What they test in university, they test their motivation, their skills, and their orientation. And that is important, I think, in every area, also in medicine, natural science, history, whatever the subject area. If you really want to test, you should also test the motivation. And historically, the role of the teachers are very important in Finnish society. When the Finnish society started to develop in 1860s, 70s, the teachers were the key players in establishing the civil society and nation building. And that partly explains teachers has been important in local community in sparsely populated area. And what is important then, because they have the competence, they have the expertise, they can work very independently. I mentioned earlier that perhaps families should be also involved and support the teachers, but they really can work independently, and they are a very strong autonomy towards their work. That is the important thing. Next, please. This is somebody has asked what is the most important in the system. I would say that it's a system on the move. We try to change the system according to personal, social, labor market needs. And this is when we were preparing the change or the elections, next election period 2 years ago, and we developed that a little further, and there will be a report to Parliament on the reforms, what kind of reforms are needed in our society and education. Yeah, I think that they are the similar challenges almost everywhere. Climate change, Finnish population is aging very rapidly. It's very close to what is happening, what has happened in Japan and Germany. There is a technological transformation. The jobs and the task, the substance of the jobs and tasks is changing. The structure is changing. The meaning of the work is changing. There is a disruptive change in the work, especially after the COVID, because then there will be a need of different kind of competencies, not only because of the distance work, but there are other reasons too, because it has happened almost every time after the crisis. Then there is an increase of demand of different kinds of new type of competencies. And therefore we think that there must be change in our system. And we have taken, I mentioned that we have noticed the growing inequality in our system. And therefore we try to find new ways. And there is a change in international order and migration. The target, the shared purposes are still basically the same: secure and stable society based on trust and sustainable growth. One of the necessities on our society is because Finnish economy is very open. Whenever something happens in the global economy, we will hit hard. We will hit hard, and when we jump high, because this is something that we really want to benefit the possibilities of global economy. For example, just to mention, there will be circular economy, there will be green economy. We are ready in Finland to tackle the challenges what are, and then we have to educate our citizens to be able to benefit and contribute. And there will be social security reforms, and there are other reforms in our security network, because in the future all the benefits and social security system should support the learners, that people can learn through their career. And that, therefore, the social security reform is mentioned there. And of course, we should have a very efficient public sector that serves all the residents. Maybe the next slide. Do we have any? Oh, that this is a picture what I made when I was looking at where the discussion is now leading in terms of the report that the government and the parliamentarians and research are preparing now, and it should be finalized within 1 or 2 months. And this is what is important. The once again stress of welfare of children and young people. But the new element is that Finland should be attractive to foreigners, to wherever they go, that we should provide the good learning environment, good environment to establish a business of your own, and to be a researcher in Finnish universities and research institutions. And of course, the educational equality, equity, and accessibility will be important in the future too. And the current state and target state to achieve in educational policy goals are now, they're defining that now. But those are the elements what I could recognize from the drafts of the report to the Parliament. Next, do we have any?
Yeah, and then we have this.
This is actually the situation, I would say, almost 2 years ago. But I think that this is still relevant to describe that you should reform all the levels of education and all the forms of education. In early childhood education, Finland is lacking a little bit behind the Nordic countries. I mean, the participation rate is lower, or enrollment rate is lower in Finland than other Nordic countries, and that we want to improve. And we also want to put more, because it has been a lot of focus on welfare and care, and we want to increase the pedagogical element throughout the early childhood education. So that is one thing what we want to add. We still want to have the welfare and care element, but increase the cognitive part of the early childhood education. And already I mentioned the comprehensive education national co-curriculum, but important is that the teachers themselves have found that a couple of years ago, when they noticed that they have some challenges in using the modern technology, they established a teacher education network, and they established a system of peer learning, tutor teachers, and that was very important. Once again, the teachers themselves, they created the system. Whenever you feel a bit insecurity in some areas of the teacher profession, there is a helper close to you. It's not a top-down and a civil servant who comes to say what you have to do. It's the teachers themselves. Okay, and the digital tools and learning environments. There was a lot of talk of modern learning environments. Basically, it is how to use pedagogically the new technology. In general and upper secondary education, I think that one of the important things there is that we are going back to the situation what in my mind was in 1950s, when the universities and high schools worked very closely together, because the docents or the researcher from the university used to be also subject teachers in the high schools. Now we are also strengthening the link of and helping the students in high schools to learn how to learn in university and adapt to the university and campus life. Therefore, that is one element. And of course, there is also which is something which is happening also, the basic education, introduction, special needs education. As regards the universities and research, we have a vision. We drafted a vision a couple of years ago, and the target for the vision for 2030, the target is that 50% of young people complete higher education degree, and that what is even more ambitious target, that 4% of the GDP will be allocated to R&D, research, development, innovation. We used to have that percentage in 2008 and 2009, but then there was almost collapses ICT sector, and now it's below 3%. It's approximately the same as the United States, and we have a similar problems in challenging in investing more in R&D, both public and private. And in internationalization, and we have the new network of Team Finland Knowledge, and I'm working for the Team Finland Knowledge Network. And we also expect that we could use the options or possibilities of educational expert, meaning that we would provide educational services, for example, in distance learning. This is something what we answer. Vocational education, I think that it has been perhaps the greatest change in the last years, the new model of vocational education that stresses a lot of the flexibility and individual solution, individual study parts, and we want to increase the learning at workplaces, not only apprenticeships, but different forms of work in business companies and small and medium-sized companies to learn how the business-like work. And of course, there was a reform of qualification, and in the vocational education, there is an increase of general education in order to facilitate the move of the higher education if needed. And there are two new with the elements in that. The other is I already mentioned that we will stress a lot of put the emphasis of the lifelong learning, or we call it continuous learning. And the other is the extension of compulsory education. The minimum school leaving age will be raised to 18 years. And the objective of extending compulsory education is to raise the level of education competence at all levels. But basically, it's a question that when we have scrutinized the new jobs and the situation in the labor market, if you don't have at least upper secondary education, it's difficult to find a job in Finnish labor market. If we look at the employment rate, the employment rates of those who have only the basic education, I mean from the 9-year basic education, and the employment rate is very low. It's approximately 45%. And if you have at least upper secondary education, it's close to 65%. And if you have a higher education degree, it's more than 80%, or even more than in some areas and 95%. And it's very high compared to what the situation is in other countries. The average employment rates of the labor market and working age population from 15 to 65 is, I would say, 73%, and it should be in Finland because of the aging population. It should be close to 80%. And if we want to raise the level of employment, we should implement, and we have decided to implement, the extension of compulsory education. I think that covers everything what I wanted to say, and thank you.
We have lots of questions here. We have gone a little bit over time. I have nothing but time, but should we take a look at the questions? Ilkka, do you have time to go through?
I'm happy to answer if I can, and if I don't, I think that we can perhaps the next time. I will do my homework if there are.
We can tackle them next week then. But let's go through. Let's see what's there. Maria, can you just read those?
Okay, so how and where might the USA begin to revamp its schooling philosophy? How did Finland flip the switch from a model that was not working?
I'm very cautious to give advice to countries, but I think that when I went with my presentation, I would say that something that is not directly targeted to the United States in general, because I know that there are a lot of differences between states. There are good states and better states, and there are some states that are struggling. I would put a lot of emphasis of equity. It is not a political point of it. It's something that you have to take care of those who have learning difficulties. You have to take into account the social background. If there is a need to more support in those areas, you should support learners or families or areas that are struggling, for example, because of the industrial change. So whatever the change is in the labor market or industry, or there are unemployment, etc. This is something you have. I don't think that it's a party political issue. It's something that how to invest wisely, because in the United States, the federal level, you really spend a lot of education, both private money and public money, and you can do it wisely. And teachers are important. Every country, if there is a way to improve the image of the teacher and support the teacher wherever it's possible, I know that you have all the knowledge and you have all the best research in the field of education. For example, what we know of early childhood education is something it's done here in the United States. And also teacher education, one of the best, several of the best universities in the field of teacher education or education are in the United States, and we look very closely, copy and try to implement your research. So there are not only equity aspect, teacher education, but also I would say that testing is not the key, ranking is not the key. I know that this is a difficult area, but if there is a possibilities to have a supportive evaluation, not much of test or ranking, that would help a lot, because then there is a confidence of the expertise, confidence of those who really work in the field. But I know that the models are different, and as I already told you, there are a lot of things that we want to learn from the system, United States, and what they do. I have learned a as regards, for example, the immigrants, how to integrate immigrants in for example, the area of California. We have 7% of our population as immigrants, but you have a much higher in some state. We will scrutinize what you do to integrate, what you can offer. So this is not that there one size fits all, but there are something in the approach. And maybe the one, if I would say one sentence, is that long-term development of education system based on anticipation, research, and cooperation. So this is not a political statement. It's a statement how the reforms are managed. I hope that this was something.
Thank you. And the next one that comes is, you've already touched on it somewhat, but when investing wisely in education, what are the focus areas for the investment? So do you want to, is there anything else you'd like to add to that? Or?
I think, but in our case, this is because I mentioned that we don't use the test, but we have sample-based studies that are done by the National Agency of Education. If you use the research information, you can identify. There are different. For example, in Finland, I refer that because there are differences in the performance of the immigrants and the locals, and this is a big difference, for example. And then we have a big difference between boys and girls. We have the problems why the boys doesn't excel at the basic education. So if you use the available research information, you can identify. It very much depends on the situation of the local level, of the state level, or sometimes even the federal level in your case. But I cannot say what are. In our case, they are. I mentioned what are the boys and girls differences and immigrants on there, and areas where they have, for example, because of the structural change in the economy, there are challenges. Those are where we have the problems. There we have to invest. But if you have the possibility to support teachers, do that.
Thank you. Then we have. Do the high school curriculum programs differ between college and trade programs?
I think the trade, I mean the vocational.
Yeah, I believe that's what.
Yeah, vocation. They are different. They are because in the vocational education, it used to be the kind of a reflection of the professions and occupations and anticipation of the future labor market. And there was a lot of degree programs. I remember, if I remembered correctly, there were more than 300 degree programs. So there were a lot of programs. But now we have changed that they are closer together than they used to be. Because now we know that instead of very specific skills, but perhaps you don't need when you enter in the labor market, because there is not anymore such profession or such type of skill needed. They are closer now than they used to be, because there is a more general element, general skills and competencies and transfers of competencies, both in the grammar schools, what we call it Lukio, grammar schools, and vocational training. But of course, there is a difference because there is a lot of training and in workplace training in vocational strands. Structurally they are different, but if you look at what they really do in terms, for example, transversal skills, they are coming closer together. But the degree programs are different.
Okay, thank you. What is the rationale behind starting basic school at age 7? How does it differ from the pre-primary for 6-year-olds?
There was a lot of discussion 15 and 10 years ago, and in Finland we stressed the importance that when the child are young, we should give them time to develop, to play, join the joy of learning, and be a kind of to keep them not to put too much pressure when they are young. That was the kind of idea. And when we made comparisons between the countries that started very early and countries that started later, we noticed that there are differences when they go to school. For example, in the UK, let's say the child of 7 or let's say 8 or 9, 8, they were a little ahead of Finns. But the Finns and the other countries that started later, the development was very fast. Within 2 years, 1 year, they were at the same level, and the development after that was better because they have had enough time to develop the personality, the other elements of how to become a human being, because it was not only the schooling and pedagogical element. But nowadays, because it has stressed so much of the early childhood education, the thinking has changed a bit. As I mentioned earlier, we have put the co-curriculum early childhood education, more pedagogical element, and the preparatory year for those who are 6 years of age, it is, as he said, it's a preparation. They learn how to work at school, how to manage their homework, and everything that is related to management their own life, and start real learning when they start their school at the age of 7. So it's as he said, it's a preparatory phase when they start to adapt to the school, what can be very stressing if there is no preparation.
Thank you. Then we have, is the system of kansanopisto and kansankorkeakoulu still in effect?
Yeah, we have we have that system, but that is oriented more adult education. And the other thing is that we try to develop it also that it can lead to degree, whatever the degree is. For example, they have a very big role in teaching and learning of digital competencies. There are a lot of competencies where they have a very good role. For example, people who are already the working life, they can go to that type of kansanopisto, työväenopisto, and learn their new skills. And they have a very important role also language learning. This is more integrated part of the education system, but there is also, we still have the system that where you can learn whatever you wish. If, for example, if you want to be a tourist and go to Nepal, you can have courses where they teach the history of Nepal and whatever the culture is there, or cooking, whatever they are. We want to provide that possibility, but they are more integrated to the educational system because they themselves want to provide something which is useful, and we can take in the account the prior learning, what they have learned in those type of institution that will be taken in the account when they enter in the formal system.
Thank you. Then there's, okay, so logistics. When I went to school, we stayed in our classrooms and the topic teacher came to the class. I believe this was in Finland. Here the students moved from class to class. How is it today now with the virus? Is it it's a little hard to.
Yeah, I think that the one, but I was scrutinizing because there is so much information about how the schools were adapted to COVID, and I think that I'm not quite sure whether the situation is now, because now we have moved on the contact learning, but that was important. There was a group of students, and they were separated the group, and they stayed in the same group. For example, 8 or 10 or 11 students, they were stayed in the same group through the day, but they were separated to other groups. So we wanted to protect them, so not to spread protect them for the COVID. So that this is something that, and also there was quite a strict rules to maintain the distance, and the schools were very strict in obeying the guidance from the National Institute of Health and Welfare. when actually yesterday I tried to go through the material what is provided from the National Institute of Health and Welfare and other institutes related to COVID. There are a lot of information, basically practically almost in every situation. So there are a lot of information at the local level, and there might be changes that I don't know. But what was important also in Finland, that we amended the Basic Act, which meant that there is more leeway and possibilities for local authorities to adapt the actions according to situation. If something happens, they can react very rapidly. And that was important to make that amendment, the Basic Basic Education Act, because in Finland it's important that equal treatment. And therefore there is an act, but now there is more possibilities for local actors to adapt according to situation. But my understanding in my answer is that there are groups that are together through the school day.
Okay, thank you. Where do businesses and corporations fit in the education partnership?
I would say that the national level, they work closely together with the teachers union and research institutions and other players in the field. But they are especially important in vocational education and higher education. I think that the basic education is something that we agree on. There is not very much differences in opinion, but vocational education and higher education is very important for them because they know the labor market needs and they have a very important role of anticipation of the labor market needs. Their contribution is not only the negotiate of the co-curriculum as such, but they have a specific role of anticipation of the labor market needs and also to provide the information to vocational education and higher education. Their support for the education system and their support for higher education is very important. Because in Finland, like in United States, for example, if they get the research part of the higher education, the private investment on R&D is more than 67%, and the research is always connected to education. So they play a very important role. But I would say that higher education, vocational education especially.
Okay, thank you. What competitive tests are there at the secondary school level? How are college level students selected?
Basically, there are requirements it's based on the scores of the basic education. But basically, every student has the possibilities to start upper secondary education. Almost 80%, almost 90%, they continue to the upper secondary. So there are study places, but there is competition in some cases. But there is test. There are requirements, but basically everybody can continue already now the upper secondary education. And dropout rate is very low in grammar schools and upper secondary education, but it is higher in vocational education. So there are the scores that are taken in the account when they choose the upper secondary education institutions, but basically there are study places for everyone already now.
Thank you.
So just to add something, that in art schools, and if you are interested in arts, music, and ballet, whatever that is, there are separate degree programs for those, and there are competition in those because there are limited amount of study places in those. But in general, there are study places for everyone.
Thank you. Is local control the city council or is there a school board?
There are both. The city council is it's a political. It's selected in local elections, but there is school board that is it's not directly. It's a not political decision because they have the board of school that consisting of the parents and principals and rectors and local players. But the political party is also important because they are investing the money. They are responsible for developing the local system, but we have both.
Thank you. Is there a national protocol to identify who will enter teaching?
There is, but this is the basic. This is the teacher education because this is open for all. As I mentioned, it's very competitive. There is no registration system as such. But if they have the degree, they have the competence, they can select whatever they are available for the whole education system. But there is no registration system that we could say he or she is registered teacher.
Okay. How is the special education organized?
That is quite complicated. I always try to learn that when this time I forgot to train myself to answer to this question, but this is something that this is provided all level of education. There are special teachers, special education teachers, and there are nurses. There's a lot of special personnel at all level of education. But I would say at the moment, I will come back to that on the next webinar. It's something that we try to keep the learners together so that we don't push those who are learning difficulties or that are need of extra support are separate in separate classes. This is something that they have added. For example, if they have problems, it's something which is they are handicapped or they have problems in learning. This is something which we'll like to integrate the normal program of the schools, and that is the basic ideology. But this is something that we made some reforms a couple of years ago. I don't remember, unfortunately, the details, but this is something, this is a relevant question. I promise to come back, either email or something. Email would be, if needed, if whoever made the question, I would try to find a comprehensive answer to that question.
Okay, thank you. When addressing the welfare of children and young people, to what extent do educational policymakers talk with other social policymakers? How often do they coordinate actions?
Actually, it was because the Ministry of Social Affairs was responsible of early childhood education. I would say we changed it to the Ministry of Education, if my memory serves me well, 5 or 6 years ago, so that there is a history to work very closely together. It was kind of, when we did that change, administrative change, it really was a change that combined the resources and expertise of the Social Affairs, Ministry of Social Affairs, and all the institutions under the umbrella of Social Security, Minister of responsible for Social Security, and Ministry of Education. So that is very important. But also this is important that we have the good connection that the ministry that is trade and employment. But anyway, this is something that it's a local level. It's we have the early childhood education centers now. It's a combination of different type of centers what we used to have previously. Actually, it was something that I learned only a couple of weeks ago, that we have changed the name. The new name describes that we want to integrate the different services that we have in society, so that it's so that the site can have all the support on the same spot or same place. There is no threshold whenever there is a need. That is the idea. They work very closely together.
Thank you.
I mean, at the local level also,
Right.
which is the most important thing. because the municipalities provide the basic education.
Right. Is the theme topic curriculum, so the theme/topic curriculum that integrates content in Finnish schools a national initiative?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
I guess it sort of goes about, like, you've kind of touched on this quite a bit, but the so I guess the themes for the curriculum, I guess, is what he's saying, that that integrates content in Finnish schools. Is that a national initiative? Like how they, I think if it, that it
Yeah,
is.
but if I understood it correctly, the idea is that we have this national co-curriculum. When I talk about transversal skills, etc., it's part of the national co-curriculum. But it's important to stress now that we still have subject areas as maths, history, languages. They are still there. But there are the new elements what I wanted to describe, and that was the transversal skills, and they learn in every subject area. For example, when you have a lesson of chemistry or physics, you can add the elements from the transversal skills, and this supports the project work. The students work together and they can combine easily than previously the different subject areas. For example, if they want to study the contamination in the neighborhood of their school, they can combine the knowledge of physics, science, social science, even history. That is the idea. We still have the subject areas, and we still have at the upper secondary subject teachers. So this is something we didn't totally change it, but we wanted to increase the cooperation and the skills that are needed in future, also in a lower level of education, not only when they are 18 or more and they go to the university. It's important that children learn to work together, and therefore that was the reason why I was stressed very much the transversal skills.
Thank you. Who are the officials and educators you have met in the United States? What are they mostly interested in?
It depends at what level, but when I came here, and I tried to have a contact with the federal level and the ministries, both the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because the international cooperation is there. I noticed that there was a lot of interest of critical thinking and multiliteracy, how to interpret different type of information. And there was a perception or idea that in Finland, because we actually started to introduce the idea of multiliteracy already in 1950s. Finland was the first country ever introduced the idea that the children need to learn to read newspapers and read TV, the information what they come from, what is available on TV. And the officials what I met were very much interested in critical thinking. That was one thing. And of course, the other thing that was not that directly linked to education was that how you can cope with the Russians. What is there a lot of pressure? And the questions in the ministries at the ministerial level was very broad, but not always directly linked, because the expertise, they know our system, they know where our strengths are. But the other level where I have worked is, I haven't worked that much of the state level, but I have worked with the researchers, and that once again the situation is that we have facing similar problems. And I told you that there is a lot of expertise and knowledge. It is very easy to start with the same topic with the expert of the United States. And we, for example, we had an interesting webinar where our Minister of Education and former Minister during the Obama administration, Mr. King, they discussed. It was very easy because in New York, they faced the same problem that we are facing in Finland. So that is very broad, very open. But if you speak with the politicians, the other thing what was very important is the artificial intelligence. How you utilize artificial intelligence. We know that you have a very very good research groups in the field of education, how you can provide the basic skills of artificial intelligence for everyone. And I was happy that we could provide artificial intelligence courses free for all. They were developed in the University of Helsinki. Finland was the first country that could provide artificial intelligence education free for everyone. I mean that free, not only connected to schools or education. Whoever was interested could go to the net and start learning of that. And there is a feedback too. Artificial intelligence, now I remember, was very important everywhere I go. How you teach to the whole population.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple more left here. One is, are there any curriculum differences that stand out in the Finnish system, also in terms of how the day is structured? For example, the 15 minutes outside for every 45 minutes of learning.
But basically, the structure is the same everywhere. But of course, where I described that they can combine, they can have a project. For example, if they need more than 45 minutes, that's possible. They can organize depending on what is the subject area, what they are doing. But the division of learning, the lessons is very important because it's very difficult also in Finland to make changes of the subject areas. To tell you something, because we in the Lutheran country there is religion in the basic core curriculum. It's very difficult to change the amount of hours what is available of religion, or there is always a competition between maths and some, for example, human sciences, whatever they are. There is a friendly discussion, a competition, which is important. But when this is set, when this is decided, it's the similar in everywhere, local level, whatever it is. But the teachers and the principals can organize the school day. But when I stress the importance that this is only 45 minutes, it is based on the results of psychology and how the children develop. That it is based on the idea that there should be breaks and there should be physical activities, because the physical activity refreshes your brains. So this is important. But basically the structure is the same.
Thank you. So then we have, it's a two-part question. Teachers are required to have master's degree in Finland to teach. Is the focus on content in the discipline, or is it on teaching methods? And then he asks if in the US there has been far too much reliance on standardized testing. Was there ever a push to do that in Finland?
I start with the standardized testing. We have we used to have the school inspectorate system. It was abolished in the beginning of 1990s, and there has been a stress to move towards that direction. There are other countries that have asked why we haven't that. There still is not anymore, but there was in 1990s stress towards the standardized testing. And because there are people use so much of they read so much from the rankings, and there is always a danger to put too much of stress on the testing. And that there was a discussion, but I think that now it's settled. When we look at the results of Finnish education system, it doesn't matter from what party you come, what is your background. I think that all not only the experts, but also the politicians are in favor of this enhancing supportive evaluation. What was the first question?
Teachers are required to have master's degree in Finland to teach. Is the focus on content in the discipline, or is it on teaching methods?
The both are included, but the difference is that if you are a class teacher who teach the classes from 1 to 9, there is the more stress on the pedagogical and what are the elements, what is something which is common to all subject areas. And if you want to continue, if you want to become a teacher of upper secondary education, then there is more possibilities to focus on subject area. So the class teachers and subject teachers are different, but the basic curricula is the same at the beginning, but then you can specialize to some area. And if you have if you for example want to teach history, you should have you should graduate from the history in that sense, that you should have write your thesis on history. Or if you want to be a teacher, a math teacher, you have to write your thesis on maths. So this is if you want to teach at the upper secondary education. But class teacher, there is also possibilities to specialization, but it's not needed that you have the thesis in that subject area.
Thank you. And we got one last question here. What is the length of the school year for elementary and secondary school in Finland? Is it 180 days as it is here?
I don't remember the number of the days. I know that it's a little bit shorter because for example, the spring semester is, if my memory serves me, about 2 weeks shorter than here. It is. I think that is one of the shortest of if you take the autumn and spring semester. But I can provide the exact number later, either email or some other way.
Okay, thank you. Those are all the questions we have here.
Excellent. That has been like, I prepared all kinds of questions for, I didn't expect this active participation. So
and I'm happy with that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly. It has been great. And yes, we did go a little bit over our 1 hour window, but I think it's okay. And we are concluding our presentation here now. And I want to thank Ilkka for sharing his expertise with us, as well as I want to thank Embassy of Finland for lending his time to Finlandia Foundation and our audience. And last but foremost, I want to thank our audience for participating and being extremely active. That has been great. We will continue next week with the part 2 of this series. And as said earlier, then we will cover more practical aspects of studying in Finland. And we hope to have you all joining us again, and remember to register. And I personally want to apologize for this was our first webinar, and the screen view was not the best in the beginning, but we are learning and we are getting better, and maybe my time control will also get better going forward. But we have recorded this, so this will be available at a later stage for all again, if you want to, or if you want to share it with your friends. And if you want the presentation, please let us know. You can just email office@finlandiafoundation.org. So with this, I thank you all and wish you a great rest of the day.
And thank you for my part also.
Thank you.